Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talks in Class. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode. My name is Jenna, your host of the pod. I hope you've all had a great week. I hope you all enjoyed Halloween and got your fill of scary movies or candy or whatever it is that you like to do and enjoy on Halloween. I feel like I kind of spent this week in hibernation mode after just a lot of travel and, like I mentioned last week on the podcast, just not the greatest flight experience on my most recent trip. So kind of laid low this week, including on Halloween, which is a little bit unusual for us because Hubs loves Halloween. It is his favorite holiday. And we kind of have a tradition where when we were living on the East Coast, every year on Halloween, we would go to the Roxy Cinema in the Roxy Hotel in Tribeca and see the original Halloween movie, which they show every year on Halloween from the 70s. But obviously, now that we are no longer in New York, we couldn't do that. So this year we opted to just stay home and watch Halloween. So that's all we did on actual Halloween, which was fine. It was fun. You know, it's always a good time to watch a scary movie and kind of get cozy at home. And we kept the tradition alive, just in a different venue, we'll say. And now it's November, and I have to admit something, you guys. I watched Just Friends over the weekend. If you are new here or just somehow don't know this, I think that the movie Just Friends from 2005 with Ryan Reynolds and Anna Faris is not only maybe the best Christmas movie I've ever seen, but just a highly underrated, hilarious 2000s movie in general. I absolutely love it. I don't think that this is totally reserved for Christmas time, but I hadn't watched it in a while, so I gave in and I watched it over the weekend. So I kicked off the holiday season already. Oops. But if you haven't seen it, honestly, Christmas or not, it is hilarious. Anna Faris, every single scene in that movie, she's so funny. I didn't realize how much I quote it in everyday life completely out of context. I feel like everybody has one or two movies that you just kind of quote in everyday life and other people aren't in on the joke. It's an inside joke with yourself. That's me with Just Friends. So as always, I will start this episode with my what good happened. And I'm going to go with a work-related one this week. I don't usually use work-related examples here because they're just not very fun. But being self-employed does come with a lot of ups and downs. And it can be really stressful because anybody else out there who is self-employed probably relates to this. It's like one day you think everything's going great, I'm killing it, you feel really good. And then the next day you're like, oh my God, everything is a disaster. What am I even doing? Lately, honestly, I've been just kind of in a funk, things are in general just feeling a little bit blah. And that happens from time to time, especially if you work in any sort of creative fields. You get into creative ruts where things just aren't flowing. But this past week, I had a brand partnership go live that I just really had a lot of fun with. It was a really fun, nostalgia-based campaign and project. And I just love when I get to work on stuff that just feels really easy. Not easy as in it's not work, but just easy as in it's fun. The brand allows me a lot of creative freedom. They kind of let me do my thing and create content that I like, but I also think my audience will like, and it just kind of flows. And this was a really fun one. So I was really happy to see it go live. And, it's just a good reminder that even when the day-to-day stuff sometimes feels a little uninspiring or like you're in a rut or whatever the case may be, I really do feel fortunate to be able to get to do what I do every single day. And things like that sometimes are nice for a little perspective shift. And speaking of work stuff, this week is a very special episode, you guys. This podcast is officially 1 year old. So this week I'm doing a kind of 1 year anniversary episode, which is a little bit of a continuation of the very first episode of the podcast, which went live late October of last year, which was called True Life, I Was a 2000s Party Girl. So this is True Life, I Was a 2000s Party Girl, Part 2. I cannot believe it's already been a year since I started this podcast. Whether you've been here from the beginning or you're new, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you guys tuning in so much. And It is just so much fun having this place where I can kind of expand on topics that I share briefly on social media, or chat more about things that I'm talking with you guys about on social media. And I love that it sparks so many conversations with you guys out there about your experiences related to these topics that I discuss, because one of my favorite things about being in this nostalgia space is how somehow, even in the absence of social media, before that was a thing, we all managed to have such similar experiences in so many ways. Like, it's really crazy and mind-blowing, and I just love to hear your guys' take or all of your experiences related to mine and the things that we're talking about on the podcast. The first episode of the podcast about a year ago was called True Life. I was a 2000s party girl because I don't think anything could summarize my experience in the 2000s quite as well as that line. And in that episode, I gave a little background on where I grew up, my teen years, just kind of my experience as just that, a 2000s party girl, because that experience obviously really informs my content. I create a lot of content about my life and my memories, and a lot of the times I'm referencing specific things that happened or specific outfits that I wore, but it also just informs who I am now, even as an adult. And it's funny because I always felt like I didn't fit in my small town, and I couldn't wait to leave. I feel like that's a very common thing amongst young people in general, no matter where you grew up. But I also think that because I had that sense that I didn't really fit in there and that I wanted to go and live somewhere else, that made me think that it didn't impact me as a person. And you know what? This episode's coming at a great time because I just spent a week back in my hometown, and let me tell you, that small town Wisconsin, it comes back real quick. It's deep in there. You can't take it out, apparently. And I do feel like as long as you maintain some connection to people and the place, of course, that is kind of the case for wherever you grew up, and just how you grew up and like the things that you did when you were growing up and the people you grew up around, it impacts who you are. And it definitely gets more and more apparent to me as I get older, because when I was younger, I kind of purposely distanced myself from that. I had this idea that I'm going to go out, I'm going to leave my hometown, I'm going to go to the big city, I'm going to create this like different life, and that's not who I am, or whatever. I think that that's a very common part of young life to feel that way in general. But the older I get, the more I realize that there really is a Midwestern old woman like deep inside me, and apparently a Midwestern teenager. No fancy restaurant is ever gonna bring me joy the way that playing Ja Rule on the Touch Tunes jukebox in a dive bar with my friends will bring me just like absolute joy. And when I go back to my hometown, I realize why I'm like this. It's because I grew up in a place where there was so little to do and so few places to go for entertainment, really nowhere to go for entertainment, that we literally drove around in circles on back roads for fun. That was our fun. We had nothing to do, nothing. We didn't even have a mall. We didn't even have a Walmart to walk around in. We made our own fun. And I think that is what made it actually more fun, is because it wasn't a real activity, right? It wasn't something that someone else decided it was fun. It was just a random thing that we decided had to be fun because there was nothing else to do. There was always an excuse for a party. Like, anything became an excuse for a party, but there was rarely an actual party. Do you know what I mean? Like, there wasn't anything formal going on. We just made anything into an excuse to have fun. And maybe because it was the 2000s and because we were in such a small town, I don't know, you guys, we partied. We partied. And it wasn't just a few of the like problem kids who partied. When I say we partied, I mean everybody partied, and we really partied. Not to say that all of our activities were partying. Some of our activities were very innocent, or at least relatively innocent. I remember early in high school, probably my freshman, sophomore year, I would sneak out of my house just to ride around in a car with these older kids because they could drive, and that felt really exciting. So I would sneak out of the window in the basement, and we would just go drive around and listen to music, and I don't even know, nothing, do absolutely nothing. I do remember one time one of them let me drive on a back road. It was before I could legally drive, obviously. But, you know, this is the kind of bored that we were, was that felt really exciting. And I did this a lot, sneaking out to do pretty much nothing. But then there was the actual partying, and there was plenty of that. I don't know how we managed to pull off what we did, but there was always some shenanigans going on. A group of kids drinking in someone's garage, a group of other people drinking on someone's family's random hunting land or random farmland that they don't use, or a group of people drinking in a barn somewhere. It was never a big group, or very rarely it was a big group. The big parties the way you see in teen movies and TV, that didn't happen in my town, but there was always a hangout, right? There was always somewhere you could go to find a group of other bored teenagers hanging out and getting into shenanigans. I really don't remember staying home in high school. I mean, hardly at all. So for this episode, without going into too much detail, because again, small town, and anybody in a small town will understand that any amount of detail will make it really easy for people to figure out who I'm talking about. So keeping it pretty surface level, I'm going to share 3 of my favorite stories that I haven't told you guys yet from my days as a certified 2000s party girl. Number 1 is the story of the tiki hut, and I cannot believe I haven't told you guys about the tiki hut yet. This is so funny to me. The tiki hut was sort of an unofficial, low-key party spot, but it was a definite certified hangout spot. And it was in my backyard of my house. Now, I grew up basically right next to my high school, so I wasn't out in the country in the middle of nowhere like a lot of the people who had the real party spots, like the designated party spots, which is why the tiki hut wasn't necessarily a party spot, but more of a hangout spot. I really wish I knew who gave it the name the tiki hut, because that really stuck. Whoever gave it that name needs to get serious credit, because it latched on and people still call it that. I mean, still to this day, people will refer to it as the tiki hut. So if you're out there, whoever gave it that name, credit to you. It basically was a screen porch that wasn't attached to my house. So if you went out my back patio door, you'd walk across the patio and then it was there. So you couldn't access it from inside the house. You had to go outside and walk across the patio. I don't know, it was very weird. So it was essentially a detached room of the house that wasn't attached to the house. It had screen windows all the way around, but you know, it had a door on it, it had electricity, there was cable out there, carpet, like it was a room of the house. I think the people who originally built our house used it for playing cards with their friends, and the house was built in the 70s, so they probably all smoked a lot, which is probably why it was all screens instead of real windows, and also probably why it wasn't actually attached to the house. You could just let it like air out. But anyway, it was a weird little building in my backyard, and clearly my friends and I adopted this immediately. When we were younger, we called it a playhouse, and it was just where my friends and I would like hang out and play with our dolls or whatever we did as kids. But once we got into high school, we transformed the tiki hut and it took on an entire new identity. My mom let us put our old couch out there sometime in high school, which my friends and I covered in a white sheet, and then we kept a can of various colored Sharpie markers out there, so everybody who came to the tiki hut would sign the sheet. And I wish I knew what happened to that sheet, because like probably at least half my high school, if not more, people signed that sheet. Like everybody had been in the tiki hut and everybody's signature is on that sheet. We also dragged my old TV out there so like we could watch movies and stuff. It's actually the TV that I have in my old bedroom at my mom's house with a VCR built in. We watched the Dazed and Confused VHS a lot. And we had a lava lamp, we had blacklight posters on the walls. I mean, we had like the whole thing. It literally looked like what you would imagine a teenager in 2001 would create if you said you can just create your ultimate hangout pad. Like we probably had beads in the doorway, and then we had this big blue trunk that I think was my friend's, and she donated it to the tiki hut, and we used it for the TV stand, but really it was a locked trunk where we would hide all of our like contraband. It's so funny, you guys. Like we thought we were being so sneaky, but when I think about it now, that's pretty obvious, right? You'd walk in there and you'd see a big trunk with a padlock on it. I think it was my gym locker from middle school. It was pretty easy to figure out what was in there. Honestly, it was it was probably mostly empty Mike's Hard Lemonade and Smirnoff ice bottles that we were just waiting until the garbage day so we could like throw it in the trash without getting caught. And I don't think we actually did much real partying in the Tiki Hut. I don't remember doing that much. It was mostly, like I said, a hangout spot or somewhere where we would go post party. Sometimes people would just be in there and I wouldn't even know, because since it wasn't actually attached to the house, they could walk around through the yard and just go in there. So sometimes I'd come home from school and I'd go in there and there would just be random people hanging out in there doing whatever. So weird when you think about it, but also just so small town. And the biggest thing about the Tiki Hut, the biggest purpose that it served, was that it was a popular spot for people from my high school to go during lunch, because our school had open campus lunch, which just meant that you could leave school as long as you didn't get in your car and drive. So anywhere that you could walk, you could go. And clearly there are certain things that you could not get away with doing on school grounds or out in the open during lunch in high school. So people would go to the cafeteria and grab a little Uncrustable sandwich or their cheesy breadsticks, and then they'd head over to the Tiki Hut, do their lunchtime thing, and then douse themselves with Love Spell. We'd light some incense and all head back to high school. I plead the fifth on my own personal involvement in the Tiki Hut lunchtime activities, but the Tiki was somewhat famous in my day, I have to say. It's gone now, but its legacy lives on. I actually talked to 2 different people, maybe more, this past weekend about the Tiki Hut. So she's famous, guys. Number 2, the time I dropped a table basically on my foot before a Britney Spears concert. This is such a funny story and I always kind of forget about it, but the whole story, not just the foot part, it just goes to show how much we just lived in the 2000s. Our parents truly let us live our lives, and it's amazing to think about now. So in 2004, I was a junior in high school, and 3 of my friends and I went to Chicago for a Britney Spears concert. Just us, no parents, no chaperones of any kind, just 4 teenagers in my friend's car. Mind you, this was 2004. We didn't even have Razr flip phones yet. This was primitive flip phone times. No GPS, no internet on the phone, nothing. I mean, we just set out with some printed MapQuest directions, and actually probably not even that. I don't even know if we used MapQuest yet. It was probably just a handwritten piece of paper with directions from one of our parents that was like, take I-90 towards Madison, keep going, follow signs for whatever the suburb was that we were going to the concert in. And this was like a 4.5-hour drive, by the way. It was not, we did not live close to Chicago. It was all the way across the state. And our parents were just like, okay, see you later, and just let us 4 teenagers head out in my friend's little car with nothing but a tank of gas and a couple disposable cameras and probably like $20 in cash. And we made this trip not once, but twice, because the first time Britney hurt her knee, something happened and had to postpone the concert, but we were already there. And again, because this was 2004, the only reason we even knew that the concert was going to be canceled or postponed or whatever was because we got to our hotel, and I remember we went shopping first. We like bring in our little shopping bags, Abercrombie and Fitch and BB and all of the stores that we didn't have in our small town, and turned on the little clock radio on the alarm clock next to the bed and put on the local top 40 station. And the radio station announced it about the concert being postponed. I mean, yeah, of course, if you think about it, this was long before we had any sort of way of them notifying us on our phone. We didn't have email on our phone. This was before texting was like a big popular thing. So yeah, the only possible way that we had to find out about this was to listen to the radio. And thankfully we did, because otherwise we probably would have just showed up at the venue and found out when we got there that it wasn't happening. So we went home, no Britney, and then we drove back to Chicago and did it all again whenever it was rescheduled for. And I'm not sure which trip this happened on, if it was the one that the concert was canceled or if it was the one where we actually went to the concert. But on one of our 2 journeys to Chicago to see Miss Spears' Onyx Hotel tour, which was amazing, by the way, I basically dropped an entire end table on my foot in the hotel room. Okay, guys, we were teenagers, so naturally we had a little pre-party for the concert in our hotel room, as one does when you were unattended, 4.5 hours away from your parents in a hotel room. And this somehow led to us climbing on top of the furniture. We were like dancing and taking pictures. I have pictures of my friend with one foot on one piece of furniture and one foot on the other. I mean, I don't know what we were doing. It was just because we were being dumb. I don't know. But I think what happened was that we were standing on this end table and it tipped over. And when I say it crushed my freaking foot, I'm surprised my foot wasn't broken. It landed right on top of my foot. Like all those little bones. It hurt so bad. It was really, really heavy. My foot was, I mean, massively swollen and black and blue for weeks afterward. I actually have a picture of me holding an ice pack. I don't know where we got an ice pack. Somebody probably had to go to the front desk and ask for it. But I have a picture of me holding an ice pack on the foot in the hotel room. I honestly wonder what I told my mom about the foot. I don't remember, but I'm sure I invented a doozy of a story. The story does have a happy ending because we eventually did get to go see the Britney Spears Onyx Hotel tour on our second journey to Chicago, and it was amazing. It was so much fun. I'm so glad we went. It was so well worth the 2 separate trips to Chicago and almost breaking my foot. And number 3, last but not least, Ringside Teen Club. Okay, I don't even know what sparked this memory because this was like a deeply buried memory that I haven't thought about in probably close to 20 years. I think it was because I recently made a video with the song Get Low, classic 2000 song, and it reminded me of all of this. Like it took me back to this place. But Ringside was this teen dance club type thing in the college town that was about 30 minutes from where I grew up. This was basically the town that we had to drive to for anything. You know, it was where the mall was, any store that we wanted to go to, you know, Target, Walmart, movie theater, anything like that. We had to go to this town. And when I was a sophomore in high school, I want to say, this place called Ringside, I don't know if it opened when I was a sophomore or if this is just when it became popular with my friends, could be either way. But anyway, our friends caught wind of Ringside. And I am dying even thinking about this because anybody who ever went to a teen club understands this experience. Like, it just makes me feel uncomfortable to think about now. A group of teenagers dressed in their best Gadzooks, Wet Seal, Express, whatever club outfits, or whatever we thought club outfits were back in 2003 when we were teenagers and had never been to a club before, would pile into this club and grind on each other to Usher and probably, you know, the Ignition remix. And it was just, I'm mortified thinking about this. Nobody should ever be subjected to something like this. I'm pretty sure they also had foam parties, which is so disgusting. I don't think I ever went to one. If I did, I have blocked it out. People lost their minds over this place. We lived in a super small town. There was nothing to do. So the fact that there was something that resembled a club like we had seen in movies and that we could actually go to as teenagers, you can see why people lost their minds. But there was a certain group of people who really, really loved Ringside. And I think it was especially because, I don't know if this was the case in everybody's high school or other high schools, or if it was just like because we were so isolated in our little town, but it was very cool for a while to hang out with and or date kids from other schools, like the neighboring towns or schools. So if you went to Ringside, you would be there with maybe some kids from our high school, but also just a bunch of other high school students from neighboring towns and neighboring schools. And for some reason, I don't know where this logic came from, but for some reason we thought that the high school boys from the next town over were somehow so much cooler than the high school boys from our own town, as if it made any freaking difference at all. My best friend and I went to this place a couple times, and I have pictures from one time that we went. Oh my God, I would love to know where we told our parents that we were going in these outfits, you guys. I am wearing pinstripe pants and like a one strap asymmetrical black top that just, the whole thing screams Wet Seal, and these big earrings. And my friend is wearing flare corduroys, tan flare corduroys, and this kind of like handkerchief hem tank top that was sort of see-through, that was like a bunch of colors, like brown and tan, and you can just tell that these were our best outfits. We pulled out the big guns for Ringside, and I can't imagine we told our parents that we were going to Ringside I don't know, maybe we did, or maybe we just told our parents that this is what we were gonna wear to go walk around the mall or hang out at somebody's house. I have no idea. The funniest part about this whole thing, whole ordeal, is that Ringside, I think, was 16 and up. It must have been. But there was an age requirement to get in. Obviously, you can just let anybody in. And when it first became popular, one of my friends who was a year older than me would go all the time, and I really wanted to go with her, but I was 15. You guys, 15. I couldn't even drive yet, okay? I might have had a learner's permit. I was 15. That's a child. I wanted to go to Ringside, so I somehow got a hold of this girl who had already graduated. I got her old driver's license to use as a fake ID to get into a teen club. I mean, come on, you guys. And you know what? I solemnly swear I never used a fake ID to get into an actual bar. Like, I never used a fake ID to pretend I was 21. Never. I was always way too afraid to do it. But for some reason, somehow I got this girl's ID to get into a freaking teen dance club. And I don't even know how I got it, because I don't think I've ever spoken to this girl in my life. And she was already graduated. So it must have been somebody who knew somebody who's friends with her that like asked her if she could give me her old ID. And you guys, this girl looks nothing like me. Nothing. There's no resemblance, except we both had blonde hair and very thin eyebrows because it was 2003. I mean, I don't know how I thought this would work. It's truly beyond me. Not to mention, she had already graduated high school, so the ID said that I was like 18 or 19 years old. You guys, I was 15. 15 years old. Clearly, that would not have worked. And thank God, I don't think I actually ever tried to use it. I'm pretty sure I just waited until I was 16, but wow. You know, the lengths that we went to find some entertainment, it was desperate times. You know what? We made do with what we had available to us in my little town. We made the best of it. So even though this whole episode was basically a list, I am going to end with another quick list, as I usually do. Since I spent a lot of time reflecting on my high school years and the partying that we did, I really got to thinking about some of the most fun and also some of the least fun times I had at parties in the 2000s. So I'm going to share with you the top 5 best types of parties we went to back in the 2000s. Number 5 is a New Year's, birthday, or some other kind of holiday party, like Halloween party or a Christmas party. This was fun, but I feel like the problem with this type of holiday or birthday party was that there was always a lot of buildup and a lot of hype. I don't really remember how most of my friends and I spent our 16th birthday, for example. I know where I spent my 16th birthday just because I remember where our normal party spot was around the time that I turned 16, but I couldn't tell you anything about that night. And I think the thing with building up a lot of expectation around a party or any sort of event is that it can just never quite live up to it. And this is why, even as an adult, I'm not really big on New Year's Eve. I don't like to go out for things like that. And it was the same thing back then. Like, the New Year's Eve parties were fine, but they were never like the best nights you ever had. Number 4, a field party or a bonfire or some sort of usually outdoor, somewhat pre-planned event where like half the school would go. So a really big party. These were fun. I had some really great times at bonfires and field parties and really large parties where a bunch of people would show up. But expanding beyond your friend group, expanding into multiple grades and multiple friend groups, and you get drama, and also just the fact that it was kind of pre-planned always led to this fear that it was going to get busted, because the longer people talked about it, the more likely it was that adults heard and we were going to get in trouble and the cops were going to show up. And how naive of us to ever think that the adults didn't know what we were doing, especially when there was a party being talked about in the halls of high school. And believe me, if there was a party coming up that weekend and it was pre-planned and everybody knew about it, everybody was talking about it, because there was rarely something like that going on. And they did often get busted. Every time I had to run through the woods, which thankfully wasn't as many times as it could have been, it was at a party like this. Number 3 is a spontaneous garage party or basement party or other kind of party spot party with your immediate friend group. These were always so much fun. And this is kind of how I spent the majority of the partying during my high school years, was like your immediate friend group, maybe on Wednesday or Thursday, or even just the day of, would realize we didn't have anything to do and kind of just put together a group of people, and we'd all show up at, you know, whoever's basement or garage or barn or whatever was kind of the party spot for our friend group at that time. These were always such great nights because there were no expectations placed on it. They were kind of spur of the moment. Not a lot of people knew about it. It was usually just your friend group, or maybe like you would bring somebody and then some other people would bring somebody. So you'd have a mixture of people, but there wasn't drama because the whole school wasn't there. And this is where some of my best memories from high school come from. I've talked about this before, but my summer going into senior year, we did this almost every single day, and we kind of had a designated spot or two where everybody just kind of knew to show up. I mean, I'm sure we called each other or texted each other to find out where everybody was, but it was always just kind of the same general group of people. Cops never came. There was never drama. And that's where you would just get into the most shenanigans, you know, because it was the people that you felt the most comfortable around. And that always leads to the most shenanigans. Number 2 is a house party, like inside an actual house, whenever somebody's parents would go out of town. And this was somewhat rare. I would say this probably happened only 3 or 4 times a school year where we could have a party in someone's actual house. And the thing about these parties is that unless it happened to be somebody who lived out in the middle of nowhere, they usually stayed fairly small because you didn't want to get busted. So much of our energy and our time as teenagers was caught up in just like not getting busted by the cops. And also I wonder, when I think about all of these things, like, where did we get our alcohol? I have no idea. These were fairly rare. They would usually stay somewhat small, at least like under control small. They wouldn't get as big as the field party or the bonfire where everybody would show up. And they were really exciting because we very rarely got to hang out in a house because we were always in barns, cornfields, garages, wherever we could get away with, pole sheds, wherever we could get away with hanging out. That's where we usually were spending all of our weekends. So for a house party, you could wear an actual outfit because you were going to be inside. You could wear your little Hollister mini skirt. You could wear your Von Dutch jeans from Gadzooks and knew that they weren't going to get like torn to shreds peeing behind a tree somewhere. So those were the best because they had that added level of feeling kind of fancy, feeling like we were living in a teen movie and getting to put together like a proper look for a party. And number 1, I don't know if this was just my town or if this is a universal experience, but graduation parties. I'm not talking about like the class party that people would throw where everybody went and partied together once school got out when they were seniors, although those were really fun too. Although mine got busted. I wasn't there, but it got busted. I had already left. I'm actually talking about like individual people's graduation parties. I'm actually in shock at how hard a lot of us went at people's homes with their parents present. The graduation party circuit was like kind of a thing. So every year at the end of the school year, obviously when the seniors would graduate, if you had friends who were seniors, you would go out on whatever day the graduation was. I guess it was usually a Saturday, and you would hit all the graduation parties. And you would probably have a pretty clear plan of which ones were going to be like more family and friends and which ones were going to be an actual party, like with a lot of booze. And you would go to the family and friends ones early. Obviously, those would be your first stop. But then you would end up at these parties that were like, I mean, some of these parties were like wedding level partying. And these were high school graduation parties. And some of the craziest things that went down at parties in my high school went down at high school graduation parties. And it's something that I kind of forget about because it seems so strange. Like my high school graduation party was in my living room with my grandma and like my neighbors, and that was pretty much it. We had a cake and some food and people gave me a card. But this is not the type of graduation party that some of the people that I went to high school with had. And those were some of the best parties because obviously you got the excitement of these people who had just graduated high school. They were done. They never had to go back. They just had their ceremony. They threw their cap and walked across the stage or whatever. They were pumped. They were super excited. They were ready to party their faces off. And then you had all of the underclassmen, like me, who were there just to have a good time because we had summer and then we had to go back to high school in the fall. I don't know. It was the perfect storm for just like insane partying. I remember sleeping on people's floors. I think one year I slept in a tent at somebody's graduation party, like out in the country somewhere. And this is again why I say that small town people are different. I cannot imagine that this went down in big cities or even suburbs, but out in rural Wisconsin 20 years ago, this is what we were doing, and those were some of the best parties I have ever attended to this day. So with that, I will wrap it up. I want to thank each and every one of you, again, who have been part of this community, who are part of this community, for tuning into the podcast, for rating, for reviews. It's so helpful to me. It means so much. For sharing with your friends. You know, that's how the podcast grows. It really does all mean so much to me, and I'm just so grateful and excited that I get to do this and I get to laugh and reminisce with all of you guys. I'll be back next week with another episode, so I will talk to you all then. I hope you all have a fabulous week. Bye.